started with a phone call. A year ago, my aunt passed away, leaving behind an old Victorian house in Rosewood. I'd been there only once as a child, and even then, it had given me chills. When I inherited it, I didn't think twice about visiting. I planned to sell it and leave, but curiosity got the better of me. There were whispers around town, stories that something strange clung to the place. Still, I was skeptical. The drive there was surreal. Rosewood was isolated, wrapped in forests and fog. By the time I pulled up to the house, it was dusk, casting the entire property in an eerie, washed-out light. The house stood, as haunting as I remembered, with its faded gray paint, crooked shutters, and a yard overgrown with weeds. As soon as I stepped inside, a stale, damp smell enveloped me, mingled with something faintly metallic. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I walked through each room, taking inventory of the scattered antiques my aunt had collected over the years. It was like stepping into a frozen snapshot of the past. Her things were exactly where she'd left them. A half-read book on the armchair, her knitting basket by the fireplace, and a teacup, cracked and gathering dust, still resting on the side table. I made my way up the stairs, and that's when the strange things began to happen. At the top of the staircase, a shadow darted past me, quick but unmistakable. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. I tried to shake it off as nerves and continued down the hall toward the master bedroom, where my aunt used to sleep. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had just slipped through it. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with a sense of wrongness. I could feel it pressing on my chest. There was a single black and white photograph on the bedside table of my aunt and a man I'd never seen before. His face was blurred, almost smudged out, while my aunt's expression was solemn, her eyes dark and piercing. The floor creaked behind me. Heart pounding, I turned, expecting to see, well, something. But there was only the empty doorway, dimly lit from the hallway. Suddenly, a cold whisper brushed against my ear, so faint I barely caught it. Leave. My stomach twisted. I could still feel the chill of that breath, cold as ice. I left the bedroom, practically sprinting down the hall, back to the stairs. Halfway down, I saw it, the shadow from before, standing at the bottom of the staircase, blocking my way. It was no longer just a dart of movement. It was solid, taller than I'd expected, its shape wavering as if it was made of smoke. I blinked, and it was gone. Shaking, I forced myself down the rest of the steps, my hand gripping the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. When I reached the ground floor, everything was silent. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I hurried to the front door, but as I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, but it was locked tight, even though I hadn't touched the lock. I glanced over my shoulder, a sinking feeling creeping into my stomach. I felt as though I was being watched. And then the whispers began again. At first, they were soft, almost gentle, murmuring from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They grew louder, echoing my aunt's voice, repeating that single word, leave, over and over. It surrounded me, growing in intensity, bouncing off the walls until it was all I could hear. Finally, I backed up, reaching for my phone to call for help, but it wouldn't turn on. No signal, no battery. I charged it fully before leaving. I had no choice but to face whatever was lurking in the shadows of that house. I stumbled back toward the living room, hoping to find a window to climb out of, but as I crossed the threshold, I froze. The photograph of my aunt had changed. Now, she stood alone, her expression twisted into something I can only describe as haunted. Her eyes seemed to follow me, filled with a desperation that felt all too real. Suddenly, a soft scraping noise echoed from the hallway, like nails dragging along the wall. My breath hitched, and I forced myself to turn. A dark figure stood in the doorway, its face obscured, its limbs too long and thin to be human. It stepped toward me slowly, its movements unnatural and jerky. I backed away, but my legs felt like lead. It reached out, its hand stretching forward, and in a voice that echoed with my aunt's, it whispered one final word, mine. That's when everything went black. I woke up outside, lying on the lawn, staring up at the overcast sky. My phone was beside me, buzzing with missed calls. Somehow, I'd lost 3 hours with no memory of how I'd gotten there. I didn't stay to find out. I left Rosewood that night and never looked back. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that shadow standing at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. And every now and then, I swear I can still hear that cold whisper in my ear, reminding me that I'd never truly left. It started on a night I'll never forget, the kind that claws its way back into your mind every time you're alone. I was working late at the call center, finishing up some client complaints when I got a call. It was strange. All the calls should have stopped by midnight, but this one came through right at 12:01. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. With a sigh, I answered, "Hello, you've reached customer service. How can I help you?" There was silence. The faintest crackling sound was the only response, like someone breathing or shifting around, but nothing else. After a moment, I heard a muffled voice. A woman, I think, just barely above a whisper. "Help me. I don't know where I am." My skin prickled. "Ma'am, this is customer service. Are you trying to reach the police?" There was no response, just that eerie breathing. I repeated myself, louder, hoping to snap her out of whatever was happening. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know where I am. It's dark and he's here. He's watching." The way she said he sent a chill down my spine. Something about the tone was wrong. So raw and full of dread, like it was the only thing keeping her alive. "Ma'am, if you're in danger, hang up and dial 911. She didn't respond, but I heard her breathing quicken. Then she said something that froze me solid. Is that you, Stephen?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Stephen is my name, but no one at the call center would know that. My work phone didn't show any personal details, and I certainly hadn't said my name. I forced myself to stay calm. "Yes, this is Stephen. How did you get this number?" She went quiet, then whispered, "You told me to call. You said you'd help me." My hands started to shake. I had no idea what was happening. My head was spinning with questions, and every fiber in me told me to hang up. But I stayed on the line. Something in her voice. It was like she needed me, depended on me. "Tell me where you are," I managed, my voice barely holding steady. A shuffling sound crackled over the line. "I don't know, I just see trees and a cabin in the distance. He's inside, Stephen. He's waiting for you." I couldn't take it anymore. I hung up, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of it. But the second I put the phone down, it rang again. It was the same number. I didn't want to answer, but my hand reached out, almost on its own, and picked up the receiver. "Hello. Why did you leave me, Stephen?" she whispered, her voice now thick with despair. "I didn't leave you. I don't even know you," I stammered. There was a pause. Then, with terrifying clarity, she said, "But I know you. I've been watching you all night." And just like that, the line went dead. I slammed the phone down, every nerve in my body on edge. I could feel eyes on me, as if someone was right behind me, watching. I glanced around the empty office, but it was silent. I checked my cell phone, no missed calls, no messages. It was just that one call on the work line. The call that somehow, impossibly, knew my name. When I looked at the call history, there was no record of it. No incoming call, no missed call. Nothing. A few days later, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I was alone, I felt that same dread clawing at me, like someone or something was waiting for me. Then last night I got another call, this time on my personal cell. The same whisper, the same terrifying message. "Stephen, he's here. He's waiting for you." And now I'm writing this because I think he's finally coming for me. I never thought much about basements until I had to move into an old rental house alone. The place was cheap, outdated, and felt like it was barely holding itself together. The creaks and groans seemed constant, but I chalked it up to an old house settling. At least that's what I told myself in the beginning. One evening, after unpacking most of my belongings, I noticed a door in the hallway I hadn't noticed before. It was painted the same color as the walls, practically camouflaged. Curious, I pulled it open and found narrow stairs leading down into the darkness. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the inky blackness, revealing cement steps that led into what looked like a damp, musty basement. The air was heavy, thick with an earthy smell that seemed to cling to my clothes. I didn't feel any need to go down there, so I shut the door and walked away. But as the days went by, strange things started happening. At first, I'd hear faint murmurs at night, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. I'd sit up in bed, trying to make out any words, but it was always too muffled. Then things escalated. Items started disappearing from my counters and reappearing in odd places, like my toothbrush in the freezer or my keys balanced precariously on a shelf I could barely reach. One night, while trying to sleep, I heard the whispering again, louder this time. It was like a constant, quiet conversation was happening just below me. I followed the sound, and it led me to the basement door. My hand trembled as I grasped the handle, pulling it open. The whispering stopped immediately, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to weigh down on me. Still, I felt compelled to go down, my feet moving as if they had a mind of their own. With each step, the air grew colder. The flashlight barely illuminated the basement walls, which were covered in strange markings I couldn't identify. And then I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. A faded, dirty mattress pushed into a corner of the basement, with tattered blankets strewn over it. It looked like someone had been living down there recently, though I hadn't seen any signs of forced entry in the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of someone hiding down there gnawed at me, but I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. I checked the doors and windows 3 times before finally drifting into a fitful sleep. But in the dead of night, I woke to a sound that froze me in place. A low, rhythmic tapping, coming from directly below my bed. It was as if someone was knocking from under the floor. My heart raced, my hands went clammy, and my mind spun with fear. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I crept toward the basement door, hoping I'd find some logical explanation. I was wrong. As I reached the door, the tapping stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I opened it slowly, the old hinges groaning. I could barely see anything in the darkness, but I felt an overwhelming sense that someone or something was down there, watching me. That's when the whispering started again, louder and clearer than ever. My skin prickled as I heard my own name repeated over and over, whispered by a voice that sounded like 100 voices layered together. I backed away, slamming the door shut. I could feel something on the other side pushing back, rattling the door as if it wanted out. I pressed my weight against it, barely able to hold it closed. After what felt like an eternity, the pressure on the other side finally relented, leaving me alone with the silence and my pounding heart. The next morning, I packed up and left, leaving the house and everything in it behind. I never went back, and I never heard from the landlord again. But sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of my name being whispered in the dark. If you enjoyed these spine-chilling stories, or if it left you sleeping with the lights on, don't forget to let us know in the comments which part made your skin crawl the most. We'd love to hear which story scared you the most. And if you're craving more terrifying tales that'll keep you up at night, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got even more haunting stories lined up that will leave you questioning every creak, whisper, and shadow in the dark.